Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. In Psalm 23, several weeks ago, in verse 3, we talked about how this verse, the paths of righteousness that Jesus is leading on, he's guiding us along right paths, that this is the center, the epicenter of Psalm 23, that everything is about the path, the right path that he's leading us on. But then we jump into verse 4, and we're talking about right paths, and it talks about going through the deepest, darkest, death-like valley. And how is this a good path? How is this a right path? And we move into this suffering, but we're still comforted by his presence and by his fighting for us and guiding us in this dark day. Even that is right path when it draws us closer to him and we lean on him. And then now we turn to verse 5, where our eyes are readjusted to, again, the ultimate reality of God's reign and rule over everything. God's reign and rule over our lives, but not as some distant king, not some far-off king that doesn't care or has just thrown everything into motion and allowed it to happen. No, but as a shepherd who comes and guides us and now prepares a feast for us. And I'm not talking about a feast like you come home for dinner and have pizza. I'm talking about feasting like Thanksgiving that goes on for days, where you have leftovers the next day and where you're so full you feel like literally I'm going to explode. This is the feasting of Jewish feasts in those days that would literally, the feasting would last for days. This is the type of feasting that God has thrown for us. This is the image that Psalm 23 gives, that David gives. Coming out of the darkest valley, he prepares a table for you. And here we go. God comes again to us. The initiator, the one who starts it all, comes to us. And he's not coming with a loaf of bread to sustain us, like, here you go, this will help you as you continue to walk the right path. But no, he comes with a feast full of steak, full of barbecue chicken, full of the best fruits and vegetables, full of mac and cheese and mashed potatoes, this amazing feast. And this is not a party tucked away that God is ashamed of you. This is not a party where somehow we think that God is ashamed of us, where nobody hears or nobody knows of this party. But this is, as it says, in front of your enemies. The place where God says, I am so proud of you that even your enemies know how much I love you and you belong to me. I am throwing this feast for you in front of them. And then the scripture puts an exclamation mark on this phrase of how much value you are to him during this feast. It says, he anoints you with oil. So let me kind of explain this. I didn't know this for the longest time. The anointing of oil in that day, many people, when they would come out of a shadow of death like valley, or when they would go through suffering, they would wear sackcloth, which is basically rags, and they would put ashes on to say, hey, I'm in this time of mourning or this time of suffering. It's sad. It's sorrowful. When they're coming out of this, they would anoint themselves with oil, saying they are moving towards gladness, moving towards joy. But if someone else anoints you with oil, this shows that you are the guest of honor. This shows that you have the prized relationship, that you are the most important person there to this person. And what we see here is that God anoints you with oil. And so many of our lives is us trying to anoint ourselves with oil, saying, hey, look at the things of my pursuit and moving towards gladness, my joy. And then we're continuing to try to anoint ourselves with oil, saying, I'm moving towards gladness. But what if it's only because God can anoint with oil to a place where we find pure joy and pure gladness, where we find pure fulfillment, not in these other things. And we can't move ourselves to those because it has to be from him. And he comes out of this, we're coming out of this deepest, darkest valley, and he anoints us with oil because we are his prized relationship, his guest of honor. This is really important, especially when you believe that God just tolerates you, that somehow you exhaust him. It's like, oh my goodness, he did it again. I can't believe he did that again. How many times is he going to do that again until he figures out it's not good or until he stops? That you are perpetually disappointing him. What happens here is you show up and he runs towards you and prepares this feast and he pours oil on you, running to you, showing everyone that you are his beloved, that he delights in you and he loves you and you're his favorite. And then on top of that, he throws this cup into your hands and he starts filling it to overflowing out of his infinite fullness. It's this beautiful picture of God's love, pursuit, delighting, celebrating gladness of those who are in his flock. And it's so wonderfully placed coming out of this shadow of death-like valley. So I want you to do for a second is turn the lights off in your room, make it as dark as you can. And we've been talking about through all of this time that this is kind of like the phase that we are in, the time that we are in, this deepest, darkest, death-like valley. And it's like, man, I hate this time because I can't see my friends. I hate doing school online. I hate it all. And now on top of that, we just announced that camp is not happening in June. And some of you are really going to break down. I broke down about this. And it's like, man, God, when is this going to end? Like, how terrible is this? We can't have camp. Are you serious? And it is. It is a dark time, and it's difficult. But I encourage you to find the goodness of God, to remind yourself of his goodness because it is infinite and everlasting, and he is always there for you, and he is continuing to provide. And so lean in on him because this is for a season. But the time is coming for feasting. You can turn your lights back on. Don't fret in the famine, for the feast is coming. Regardless of where you are now, regardless of how you are feeling, I know that most of you are probably very, very sad. There is a feast coming that he has prepared for you. And I'm not just talking about heaven and later, way on in life when it's all over. I'm not just talking about that time. I'm talking about now. That he delights in you and he wants to bless you and graciously extend his richness to you, even in the valley of the shadow of death. There is a feast that is to come. This is foreseen. This is shown in Luke chapter 15 when Jesus tells the parable of the prodigal son. And it parallels this almost exactly. You see, the prodigal son is a story of a son who takes his father's inheritance, disowns him, and says, basically, you're dead to me. And he runs off and he splurges it and spends it on prostitutes, drugs, alcohol, anything, gambling, you name it. He literally defiles his father's property. And in complete desperation, because he's eating with the pigs and he's starving and he's wasted everything, he says, you know what? Maybe I can go back to my father's house and I can be a slave. And in desperation returns to the father. And it says that the father is looking at the horizon, waiting for his son. And this is the moment that he runs up to us in the valley, coming out of the valley of the shadow of death, deepest, darkest, death-like valley. He embraces us. And the son's like, you know what? I don't deserve any of this. God, I've turned my back on you. I don't deserve. Look at all the stuff that I've messed up on. Look at how terrible I am. And he's like, he's not going to have any of it. He says, no, it's time to celebrate, for you were lost and you found now. You have turned back to me. And he throws the best robe over his son, and he kills the fattened calf, and he throws this massive party. And the scriptures say that the older brother out in the field heard dancing and music playing. When the prodigal comes home, when we finally submit and surrender to the comfort and guidance and come to Jesus, there is this celebration that erupts where there is music and dancing that can be heard in the fields. That will happen now here on earth. That yes, I know there is a valley of the deepest, darkest shadow of death-like experience that we might be going through now, but there is feasting that can come in him, but only in turning to him. And this goes back to those right paths that we are on. Maybe this is a time that is turning you back to him. I beg of you, don't run from him during this desperation, but allow the desperation to turn you towards him and say, maybe he will provide for me. And he has this feast ready to give you. And this is not something that you can earn. It's freely giving to you. And we spend so much of our lives trying to earn this cup that overflows, trying to earn this feast that is prepared before us. And Jesus it's such a sad story because it's freely given to you. You cannot earn this. Guys, there is courage. There is encouragement, is that there is a feast coming. And I promise you one, we will feast again. But this is not a time to turn from him and say, I want nothing to do with you, God. This is a time in desperation to turn towards him, to allow the celebration of life, spiritual life, being renewed. And so this is your time, one, to stand up, to own your faith, and to start growing in it more than ever. And so we have been reading these Bible plans, Acts, and hopefully you've been doing that. If you have not, please contact your small group leader. They will tell you what plan you should be reading in the Bible Act. Dive into that. It's so good. And in the book of Acts, it talks about how daily their numbers were added to their following of Jesus. Every day, numbers were added to it. And so I encourage you now, the two challenges is, read the Bible plan, and then secondly, you need to invite somebody to your Zoom meeting next week. This is not a time to just keep doing what we're doing. This is a time to grow daily those who are following him. Invite somebody to your Zoom meeting who has not been participating or who doesn't know Jesus. And then another challenge is, hey, we're going to start praying every Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Every Tuesday at 11 a.m., we're going to pray. So I'm going to invite you to that. I challenge you, please come and be a part of that. A feast is coming. Don't fret in the famine, for a feast is coming as well. I love you one. Bye.